It starts right now. A Renewed Mind, hosted by Dr. H. Duante Duckett, pastor of New Kingdom Faith Christian Church. Position yourself right now to be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Now, here's our host, Dr. H. Duante Duckett.
Hello, this is Dr. H. Duante Duckett, and welcome to another podcast of A Renewed Mind. And I'm so excited that you decided to join me this evening as we travel through this opportunity to start renewing our mind and beginning a new life that God has had ordained for us since the beginning of time. And it all begins with us renewing our mind. We understand, and we've been going through this season of renewing our mind by allowing God to expand us in our thinking and understanding that there's power in a renewed mind. But guess what? You have to go through the process of renewing your mind. So each week we have been doing a deep dive into what it takes to renew your mind. As mentioned before, if you haven't known or you do not know, but you are going to find out now that I'm a very practical teacher. Don't allow the speech to get too high for you. I don't take you too high and not allow you to reach what you should be reaching for, not able to grab what you've been reaching for. I like to keep the fruit low hanging. That means you're able to pick the fruit right off the tree and then apply it to your life. That just means I'm giving you some tidbits. I'm giving you some practical steps on how to renew your mind so you can add them to your life, and then you can start seeing the fruit of the principles that you add to your life immediately. Believe me, it's not an easy task to renew your mind. It's not something that you can start one day and end the very next. In fact, it is a lifelong lesson. It's a lifelong learning that you will begin in and start with and not really end, listen to me, until you meet your Lord. You're going to be constantly renewing your mind. So let's go in tonight's session as we begin something I believe that's going to really help shift some major areas in your life. It's going to help shift some major areas in your life. A few weeks ago, we started talking about the thirst of a renewed mind. A renewed mind has a different thirst than carnal-minded individuals. You want to do different things. And one of the first things we talked about as it relates to your thirst being changed or thirst changing is that you begin to pursue holiness. A renewed mind, a person that's renewing their mind, wants to pursue holiness. It thirsts for holiness because it wants to be whole. You want to be whole in you want to be whole in your thinking. You want to be whole in every part of your life. So a renewed mind, that's what thirsts differently. And the first thing it thirsts for living a holy lifestyle. It wants to pursue holiness. So this a few weeks ago, we started about talking about the thirst to pursue holiness. And then we talked about, you have to deal with your temptations. There's some areas in your life that you have to deal with. We need to make sure that you understand that dealing with your temptations is going to help you, listen to me, become whole. You cannot become whole. You cannot become whole until you deal with the areas of your life that keep tripping you up. These same areas that keep messing you up, that keeps having you going backwards instead of going forwards. You have to deal with them because you want to become whole. I mentioned to you, I just said it, a renewed mind has no desire to be living broken. A renewed mind has no desire to have broken pieces all over them. A renewed mind desires to be whole. And I'm telling you, in order to be whole, you got to deal with those temptations, because I'm telling you, when you pursue holiness, the first thing holiness is going to do is going to force you to deal with your temptations. And so when you deal with your temptations, you got to understand, we talked about this. We stated that trying to fight the temptation with your own strength or with a program alone will defeat you. No addict to any temptation will seek deliverance until they decide it's time to. No addict to any temptation will seek deliverance until they decide it's time to. Listen, the enemy, the devil, knows that whatever you are hungry for is what he's going to use to tempt you. Listen to this. He knows whatever you are hungry for is what he's going to use to tempt you. You can't listen. He's not going to tempt you with something that doesn't even appeal to you. He's going to tempt you with something that he knows you're thirsting for. He knows that you're hungry for. Listen to me. If this is over, here doesn't affect you, if this over here doesn't affect you, you don't expect to be tempted by it. Dealing with your temptations will require you to go through a dry season and resist what you normally say yes to. Listen, and then lastly, we said, in order to completely be delivered and stay delivered, you must know the word, but not just listen to the word. You must do what it says. Last week we did something. We talked about something that was, I think is a major shift in a lot of person's lives that really touched a lot of people. We had a lot of downloads on this topic on last week. It says, we talked about you got to deal with the matters of your heart. You got to deal with what's going on in your heart, because that temptation originated from somewhere. And this most likely it dealt with it originated from an issue or a subject or something you haven't dealt with in your heart. Your actions and your true nature originate from what's happening in your heart. Your heart has been hardened by what you have been exposed to and what you allow yourself to dwell in you. When you are bold enough, listen to me, when you are bold enough to deal with the matters of your heart, you will no longer struggle with believing that God will do what he said he will do through you. Listen to me again. When you're bold enough, that means you got to get bold. That means you got to really listen and face your fear. When you're bold enough, you have to deal with the matters of your heart. You will no longer struggle with believing that God will do what he said he will do. Listen to this, y'all, through you. Planning to be pure on a daily basis should be at the forefront of every renewed Christian's mind. Listen, when you bold enough and you actually start dealing with the matters of your heart, one thing is going to happen. You're going to plan on being pure daily. That means you're going to plan on living a holy life daily, because that's part of what you're thirsting for now. But it comes with a plan. You got to deal with the matters of your heart, because when you deal with the matters of your heart, it makes it sets you on the path of living a holy and pure life. It helps you deal with your temptation. It helps you pursue holiness daily. Listen, y'all, this is why you becoming whole actually helps. It helps you to renew your mind. It puts you on that path of a renewed mind every single day, because we all have something daily that we have to deal with. But this week, God is telling us that in order to be whole, we must operate with radical forgiveness. This is good, y'all. We must operate with radical forgiveness. Now, Pastor, why are you talking about, Dr. Duckett, why are you talking about radical forgiveness? Why can't it just be forgiveness? Because I'm going to share with you, we're going to dig deep tonight. We're going to dig deep in this podcast. I believe there are degrees of forgiveness. And I believe a renewed mind must operate with radical forgiveness. That's a level of forgiveness that many of us, many persons that you are connected with, many persons that you've had relationship with will never be able to get to, because they have not sought or even thirst after or even tried to pursue radical forgiveness, let alone forgiving, let alone trying to forgive someone for what they did. But listen, radical forgiveness. Let me give you a tidbit. Let me wet your whistle just a little bit. Radical forgiveness, listen to this. Radical forgiveness is apologizing or even asking for forgiveness for the person that hurt you based on what they did to you. Listen to me. You're seeking their forgiveness for what you did to them through your thinking or through your actions based on what they did to you. They hurt you, but you sought back to hurt them. You're asking them to forgive you based on what they did to you. Radical forgiveness. Some of you've never heard that before. Pastor, what are you saying? Are you telling me I need to forgive? I need to ask them to forgive me for what they did to me? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is they did what they did to you. True. You've forgiven them, but now you're taking it a step further. You want them to forgive you for what you thought about them, what you said about them after what they did to you. Because now you're operating with radical. You remember what Christ said on the cross, right? The first word, he said, Father, forgive them. for they know not what they do. They didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know who you were. This is radical forgiveness, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. We're going to get back to that point. But you need to understand, a renewed mind will operate with radical forgiveness. God is requiring us to take forgiveness to an entire different level. For some of you, this will be the hardest pill you will ever have to swallow. Listen, because we expect forgiveness to come from the person who has offended us. Lord, this is so good. We expect forgiveness to come from the person who has offended us. We expect the perpetrator of the act against us to own up what they did to us. For many of us, if we don't get an apology from the person, we will remove ourselves from that person's life. There are persons persons listening to this podcast right now who hasn't spoken to a person because of what they've done to them. Listen, you haven't spoken to a person because of what they've done to you. I'm talking about parents, children, former best friends. We believe we deserve an apology from them. If you wronged me, then I deserve an apology. Who feels like that? We all do. We all have it. Come on, we all. Can we own it today? Can we own that feeling this evening? Can we own it on this podcast? We all have it. We all have someone that we have not spoken to, or we still holding a grudge against because of what they did to us. God is telling us, in order to renew your mind, you're going to have to operate with radical forgiveness. We think we deserve an apology from them. If you wrong me, then I deserve an apology. Listen, then on the flip side, when we have been the perpetrator of the offense, pride refuses to allow us to apologize. Not just apologize, to not even associate with the person. Listen, y'all, a major piece of the puzzle of being whole is forgiveness. I'm going to say it again. A major piece of the puzzle of being whole is forgiveness. Receiving forgiveness and receiving forgiveness and giving forgiveness. The sad thing is, there are persons who are listening who can't even receive forgiveness, nor can they give it. I'm here to tell y'all, you've never been the recipient of forgiveness, which means you can never give forgiveness. How can you give something that you've never been given? How can you allow someone else? How can you operate with radical forgiveness when no one else has shown that towards you? That's why we're here on this podcast tonight, to help you understand that you must begin the process of operating with radical forgiveness. But what does it look like? Your heart has gotten so hard you can't even really receive it. Out of your mouth, you say you accept it, but really your heart is not in it. We're going to dig that root up tonight, because it's a root. It's a taproot bondage. It's a bondage that you're operating with that has not allowed you, or will keep you from operating with radical forgiveness. Let's go to a familiar story in the Bible. Let's peek in on Joseph and his brothers. Y'all remember the story of Joseph and his brothers, right? Turn with me to Genesis 45, 3 and 8. I'm going to read this text, and I believe you're going to remember the text, but let me read it for you, and then we're going to break it down a little bit so we can begin to talk about what it means to operate with radical forgiveness. Then Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Does my father still live?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed in his presence. And Joseph said to his brothers, "Please come near to me." So they came near. Then he said, "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into slavery. But now do not therefore be grieved or angry with yourselves, because you sold me here. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For these 2 years the famine has been in the land, and there are still 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvesting. And God sent me before you to preserve a posterity for you in this earth, and to save your lives by the great deliverance. So now, it was not you who sent me here, but God. Let me set up the story for everyone tonight. Joseph had dreams. Y'all remember this story? It begins in Genesis 37. Joseph had dreams that God gave him. Joseph told his brother his dreams. Joseph's father, Jacob, loved Joseph more than his brothers. Joseph's brothers hated Joseph. Joseph's brothers wanted to kill him, but instead they threw him in a pit and sold him. Now, if anyone in this Bible who should be bitter and operating with unforgiveness, should be Joseph. When your family turns on you, that's an entire different level. However, Joseph confessed that what happened to him was because God allowed it for the family. This is my God. Listen, what Joseph confessed, that what happened to him was because God allowed it to happen for his family. I want you to write this point down. I'm going to share with you. Write this down. I hope you got something to write with. The offense that happened to you in many ways has made you stronger. Listen to me, y'all. The offense that happened to you in many ways has made you stronger. Joseph declared, don't worry about what you did to me. God allowed it and sent me ahead of you to protect the entire family. My God. Let me tell you, a renewed mind sees beyond the offense into the destiny. Oh, y'all better get this. Come on, please get this. Every podcast listener, you got to get this. A person that has renewed their mind or is renewing their mind, you have the power to see past the offense into your destiny. My God. You understand that the offense is only steering you closer to your destiny. What are you saying, Pastor? You saying what they did to me in my past is actually helping me get to my future? Yes, that's what I'm saying. Get this. Joseph never asked for forgiveness. Joseph never said, you owe me. Joseph didn't need to hear, I'm sorry. Oh, I need y'all to hear. Joseph didn't even need to hear the words, I'm sorry. Who am I talking to? You're still waiting for the I'm sorry to make the move. You're still waiting for the I'm sorry to renew the relationship. You're still waiting for the I'm sorry for the reconciliation. Joseph didn't even have to wait. Joseph didn't even wait for the words I'm sorry because he was beyond the offense and he was into his future. But many of you here, y'all weren't thrown into a pit. You were never left to die by your own family. But here's Joseph operating with radical forgiveness. The next thing I want you to write down is this. Listen, write this down. The first principle of radical forgiveness states, listen, operating in radical forgiveness requires you to intentionally release the offense and the offenders. Listen. Many of us, we may get to the point where we release the offense, but we haven't released the offender. I'm not talking about bailing them out. No, you are setting them free from recourse. You're setting them free. Joseph never brought up the offense again. You read through the scripture, you read through Genesis. Joseph never brought up the offense again. Operating in radical forgiveness does not allow you to throw the offense back in the offender's face. Listen. Now the offenders, that's Joseph's brothers, didn't know what to do. Evidence that you're becoming whole, evidence that you're thirsting for something different, evidence that you're renewing your mind is you no longer need nor desire an apology. Oh my goodness. Evidence that you are becoming whole, evidence that you're in the process of renewing your mind is you no longer need nor you desire an apology. If it comes, great. If it doesn't, even better. Come on. We need to dig deep tonight. This is really good. I got a quote from one of my favorite authors, Henry Nouwen. He wrote his book, The Wounded Healer. If you don't have that book, you need to get it. The Wounded Healer by Henry, Henri Nouwen, Nouwen, Henry Nouwen. But God's forgiveness is unconditional. It comes from a heart that does not demand anything for itself. A heart that is completely empty of self-seeking. If it is this divine forgiveness that I have to practice in my daily life. It calls me to keep stepping over all of my arguments that say forgiveness is unwise, unhealthy, and impractical. Listen what he said. He said this. Listen to this again. He said this. It calls me to keep stepping over all of my arguments that says forgiveness is unwise, unhealthy, and impractical. It challenges me to step over all my needs for gratitude and compliments. Finally, this is what Henry Nouwen said, it demands of me that I step over that wounded part of my heart that feels hurt and wrong and that wants to stay in control and put a few conditions between me and the one whom I asked to forgive. This is really good, y'all. This is really good. If you want to hear from me that God is going to get your enemies, that the demise of your enemies is just around the corner, you got the wrong podcast. You got the wrong podcast. I'm not the preacher that will keep telling you that God is going to destroy your enemies. I'm here to tell you, look what God told Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, I'm praying for the prosperity of my enemy. Okay, now we're starting to step into this operating with radical forgiveness. When you get to the point where you want to pray for the prosperity of your enemy, everyone who has hurt you in the past and who will hurt you in the future, God, make them the head and not the tail. Lord, y'all, I'm telling you, this podcast, I need you to share this podcast with as many persons as you can. Dietrich Bonhoeffer makes this statement, I'm praying for the prosperity of my enemy, which says to me, everyone who has hurt me in the past and who will hurt me in my future, God, make them the head and not the tail. Make them above, let them live above and not beneath. Bless them, God. Pray. You need to begin to pray for the prosperity of your enemy. God is looking for a mature church. I'm trying to grow you up right now because whatever church you belong to, whatever ministry you're a part of, I'm telling you, you want to elevate your ministry, learn how to start praying for the prosperity of your enemy. How I would love to turn back the hands of time. Listen, many of you don't know, but my father died right before my daughter was born. My daughter's 31 years old, so my father died 31 years ago. I was in the military. I was overseas in Spain, and my wife was about to give birth to my daughter, and my father was on his deathbed, but I decided not to go back. In the military, they do allow you to go back home for free so you can mourn your loved one or bury or go to the funeral, funeralize your loved one. I decided not to go back, and I've regretted that decision every day. I know it's made me stronger, but I've regretted it because I was hurt by my father. He never really did much for me, not as much as I would love for him to do. He was never really there for me, so I carried some ill will against him. He offended me. I had unforgiveness in my heart towards him. Listen, if I could turn back the hands of time to be at my father's bedside before he passed, to tell him I loved him despite the fact that he may not have been the best father in the world, and tell him that I still loved him unconditionally because I know he did the best that he could. He only gave me what he received. Now I know what Paul meant when he said, I pray every day, God, take this thorn from me. The lack of love that I received from my father, the thorn of guilt of not being there for my dad when he died. But then the word says his grace is made perfect in my weakness. That thorn that's in my side, that guilt thorn of me not being there, help me, oh God, thank you. helps me love the unlovable, helps me to minister to men and women who are struggled with addiction. Help me minister to the least of these, the left out and left behind. That's the thorn that's been in my flesh. But the word of God said he's made perfect in your weakness. It has allowed me to do ministry at a level that I know I would not have been able to do if it had not been for that thorn. Look at another story I have for you. Genesis 32:11 through 12, and then Genesis 33:1 through 4. I'm going to read Genesis 32:11 through 12 first. Verse 11 says, "Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau." This is Jacob praying to God because he wants to be delivered from his brother Esau. "For I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude." Now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there Esau was coming, and with him were 400 men. So he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the two maidservants, and he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. And he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near his brother. Joseph ran to meet his brother. Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Let me tell you the short story. Not really a short story, but let me give you the short version of this story about Jacob and Esau. Jacob stole Esau's birthright. Jacob went into his father's tent, Isaac, and pretended to be Esau. Esau was the firstborn. When Jacob got the blessing from his father, his brother Esau swore to kill him. Now Jacob has a family and now has to confront Esau. Be careful who you wrong, because you will have to face them eventually. Now they meet. Jacob is afraid, so he sends his family ahead of them to soften Esau's heart. Esau allows all of them to pass by because he wants to see Jacob. Esau has let go, but Jacob is still burdened with it. Many of us, I need you to write this down, many of us are carrying around burdens of the offense while the other person has moved on. Or you may be Esau, and you can't wait to see your Jacob. You are spending, listen to this, you spending more energy on revenge than reconciliation. A renewed mind, kingdom citizens, person that's renewing their mind, always focuses on reconciliation versus revenge. This is the second principle of radical forgiveness. You need to write this down. Operating in radical forgiveness is the act of grace you bestow on the offender that is empowered by God through you. You are now God's ambassador of grace on earth. The grace of God flowed through Esau towards his brother. Here you are avoiding the very person who is God's grace agent in your life. Y'all better get this. The person you are avoiding is God's grace agent in your life. Let's go to another story. The story of David. David and his mentor Saul, the one that he was the armor bearer for. Listen to this. We're going to 1 Samuel 24, 4 and 10. Then the men of David said to him, "This is the day of which the Lord said to you, Behold, I will deliver your enemy into your hand, that you may do to him as it seems good to you." Now his men, these are David's men, declaring that his enemy, which is Saul, is in his hand. And he's able to do whatever he wants to do to him. David has the opportunity to do whatever he wants to do to Saul because Saul is out to kill him. But look at what David says. "And David arose and secretly cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Now it happened afterward that David's heart troubled him because he had cut Saul's robe. And he said to his men, The Lord forbid that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed, to stretch out my hand against him, seeing he is the anointed of the Lord. So David restrained his servants with these words, and he did not allow them to rise against Saul. And Saul got up from the cave and went on his way. David also arose afterward, went out of the cave, and called out to Saul, saying, "My lord the king." And when Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the ground and bowed to him. Now, this is how powerful David is. David had the opportunity to kill his enemy, but when he comes face to face with him, he still shows him honor. Wow, this is operating in radical forgiveness. David bowed down, and David said to Saul, "Why do you listen to the words of men who say, indeed, David seeks your harm? Look, this day your eyes have seen that the Lord delivered you today in my hand in the cave. And someone urged me to kill you, but my eyes spared you and said, I will not stretch out my hand against my Lord, for he is the Lord's anointed." David was Saul's armor bearer. Listen, this is the same David that killed Goliath for Saul. David served Saul with all he had. David was Saul's field general, but Saul could not handle the anointing that was on David's life. Saul was trying to kill David because he knows the next move for David is his throne. David is on the run, but he finds Saul asleep in a cave. David's men want to kill the man that is trying to kill them. However, David operates with radical forgiveness. He restrains himself and restrains the men. David had pure motives towards Saul, and it showed, but Saul couldn't see it. The third principle of radical forgiveness, writing it down. I hope you're writing this down. Operating in radical forgiveness requires you to practice daily emptying your heart of self-seeking motives. I'm going to repeat this because this is what a renewed mind, a person that's renewing their mind, does this. Because when you operate radical forgiveness, requires you to practice daily emptying your heart of self-seeking motives. David never wanted Saul's throne. All David wanted to do was serve. Deal with your heart. I told y'all that last week, right? If you're still waiting for someone to step to you to apologize because of what they have done, then what's really going on in your heart? David knew his place. David did not have a problem with being number two. You must daily check the motives of your heart. Listen to this quote I discovered. Listen to this. To forgive another person from the heart is an act of liberation. Repeat that. To forgive another person from the heart is an act of liberation. We set that person free from the negative bonds that exist between us. We say, I no longer hold your offense against you. But there's more. We also free ourselves from the burden of being the offended one. As long as we do not forgive those who have wounded us, we carry them with us, or worse, pull them as a heavy load. The great temptation is to cling in anger to our enemies and then to find ourselves of being offended and wounded by them. Forgiveness, therefore, liberates not only the other, but also ourselves. It is the way to freedom of the children of God. It is a way to freedom for the children of God. David was already liberated from the offense of Saul. He didn't need Saul to apologize because his heart was pure. He wanted to serve Saul. He had no desire to hurt Saul. Look, we're going to go to our final story and we're going to close this out. Remember what I shared with you at the beginning of this. Luke 24:34. Look what Christ said. Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do. And he divided his garments and cast lots. Jesus, y'all, was already beaten to the point he was unrecognizable. He was forced to carry his own cross. crown of thorns crushed on his head, 9-inch nails hammered in both his hands, 9-inch nails hammered in his lower legs, nailed through the bones. Oh my God. The only food of nourishment was for him to be drinking his own blood as it dripped in his mouth. Suffocating because he couldn't breathe properly, but the first word that comes out of his mouth, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Principle number 4 of radical forgiveness. I need you to write this, please. Operating in radical forgiveness will free you to passionately display agape love towards your offenders. Listen to me. I'm going to repeat it again. Operating in radical forgiveness will free you to passionately perform agape love towards your offenders. Jesus asked God to forgive them because he wants them to still believe on him. My God. Jesus knew his purpose. He decided that, guess what? My wounds and the offense are not going to keep me from performing my purpose. And his purpose was to deliver every man to believe on him, even his offenders. While you're still feeling the sting of the wound, do you have the strength to ask God to forgive them on your behalf? While the wound is still fresh, are you secure enough in you to ask God to forgive them? Then are you strong enough to ask the offenders to forgive you for displaying your unforgiveness towards them? Listen to me. This is the key point. Are you strong enough to ask your offenders to forgive you for delaying your forgiveness towards them? That's good, y'all. The fifth principle of radical forgiveness states, operating in radical forgiveness seeks forgiveness from the offender because of their own delayed forgiveness. This is so good, y'all. Operating in radical forgiveness seeks forgiveness from the offender because of your own delayed forgiveness. You are too mature to allow another day to lapse on seeking forgiveness from your offender without receiving anything in return. Your motive is not to seek after forgiveness in order to get it out of the offender. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 10:12, therefore let him who thinks he stands take heed lest he falls. That just means if you think you have it all together, you better check yourself, because you are on the brink of falling. You are going to be the one who needs forgiveness. Thanking God that he doesn't require what we require from other folk. I love that. I thank God that he does not require from us what we require from other folk. My God. Micah 7:19 says, you will again have compassion on us. You will tread our sins underfoot and hurl all our iniquities into the depths of the sea. While we are waiting for them to ask for forgiveness, all that we have done against God has been thrown into the deepest part of the sea. So God is saying, why are you doing the same? Why aren't you doing the same? What you did in the past, he has forgave. What you are thinking now, he has forgave. What you will do in the future, he has already forgave. Romans 5:10 says, for if we were enemies, when we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his son. Much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. Ephesians 1:7 says, in him we have redemption through his blood, the forgiveness of sin, according to the riches of his grace. Thank you for being here with me tonight and listening to this podcast. God says it's time for us to operate with radical forgiveness. You're asking your offender to forgive you for your delayed forgiveness. Wow. This was good tonight. I pray that you've gotten something tonight. I pray that you're able to add this to your life as you're renewing your mind. I'm Dr. H. Duante Duckett with another podcast of A Renewed Mind. God bless you.
You have just been blessed by the transformational teaching of Dr. H. Duante Duckett. Tune in next time to another segment of A Renewed Mind.